Hey everyone, welcome back to Room 237 as I continue my reviews of the films in the original Planet of the Apes saga. So now I come to the third film in the series, 1971's Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which I'm holding up like this because I only have it as part of the Planet of the Apes Legacy Collection. Now, this came out despite the previous film that came up previous year, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which was my last video. I ranted on it. However, I was so focused on my allergies flaring up that I didn't really rant as much as I wanted to on that film, because I really am not a fan of that. It's the only one of the original series that I dislike. And even though, spoilers, the planet exploded and blew up and was dead at the end of that film, an idea made by Charlton Heston so that there could be no more sequels, the idea for a third film came up shortly later. And in a way, I'm sort of glad, because Beneath the Planet of the Apes would have been a very disappointing sequel and ending if that was where they stopped it. It's kind of a cheat, but with this, Zira and Cornelius were able to salvage one of the astronauts' ships from the first two films. One of their fellow chimpanzee scientists, Dr. Milo, was able to repair and operate it. And this was all going on during Beneath, like behind the scenes that we didn't see. They were able to fly away from the planet, and they saw it explode from space, and then they got stuck in the time warp that Taylor and Brent were in, and ended up in 1973 America. And this film actually, it was directed by Don Taylor, and of course was made by series mainstays, produced by Arthur P. Jacobs, written by Paul Dane, who wrote the previous film, would go on to write this and the next two films. Music by Jerry Goldsmith, makeup effects by John Chambers, and starring Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter as Cornelius and Zira. It was made on a $2.06 million budget and brought in $12.3 million. And this is widely considered to be, next to the original, the best Planet of the Apes film, or at least the best sequel. It's always been the highest praised. It is more of a character study. It's the love story of the original series. It's really the turning point of the entire series, because now we're back in more or less present day Earth, and now it's the apes that are in the strange land that are going to be treated like, they're now the victims. They're now the hunted ones. So we've had two films where apes were the bad guys, but now with time travel, we've completely inversed it. And this will help set up Conquest and Battle, which is what the reboot trilogy was heavily based on. Not remakes of, but heavily based on. And much of the production design was able to go, or much of the budget was able to go to the production design, because they only had two apes. I mean, in the beginning there's three, but mostly there's two. So a lot of the makeup department did not have to go towards all this latex for apes like in the previous two films. So that helped out a lot. this is probably, I think this is my girlfriend's favorite Planet of the Apes film, because I rewatched it last night and it was her first time ever seeing it. It is one of my favorites as well. I definitely enjoy this as a turning point where now we start to get to see the evil of humanity and sort of the apes be treated like the victims. But also there's a lot of, I don't really want to say self-awareness or self-referential, but talking about how, you know, it's the same thing, you know, the apes say, well, it's the same thing we were doing to them in our time, and also the humans saying, well, what they do to us in the future is no different than what we do to them now. And what's really interesting is we have the, especially in like today's political climate and everything that's gone on just for so many years, the president is actually one of the good guys of this film. The whole downfall of this story is because it's one of, I don't know if he's like the secretary or what, Dr. Otto Hesselin. Oh, science advisor. The president's science advisor. He's the one that keeps pushing the issue of apes dominating the world and them needing to be stopped. But everyone else seems to be on board with these two apes, and he's the one that really... the first half is like a comedy. They really push the humor. It is pretty funny. And then it becomes like an on-the-run escape film in the second half. Also, Natalie Trundy, who was the mutant Albina in the previous film, she returns in this as a different character, and she'll be a mainstay for the rest of the series. Not as this character, but... So the the film opens up with the ship crashing, and we get the military showing up to greet the astronauts that are in it. And when they say, greetings, men, welcome to the United States, the helmets come off and they see it's three apes. Cornelius, Zira, and their friend Dr. Milo. Who Dr. Milo was played by was someone that I had heard of. Salminio? He was in A Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean. Okay. But anyway, they're brought, because they crash near Los Angeles, they're brought to the Los Angeles Zoo. And, so I guess it was Taylor's ship that they were able to get from the bottom of the lake or whatever it was and salvage it. But they're put in the zoo, and at first they're not talking, because of course their big rule that they gave Brent and Taylor in their time was don't ever speak, because you'll be dissected and killed. So at first they don't speak. But then we meet Lewis and Stevie, who are these two doctors. Stevie's the one played by Natalie Trundy, and Lewis is played by Bradford Dillman. They give them some sort of tests, like they're in this cage within the building. They give them these tests, like shapes, tests of memory, and can you put the right shape block in the right shape thing. Zira does it flawlessly, and then is able to put blocks together to build steps to reach a hanging banana, but she just sits there. And when Stevie says, why doesn't she eat it, Zira finally says, because I loathe bananas. And that's when they decide to speak. And then they have a board hearing to determine if they really can speak and how far that intelligence will get them. But while they're being held in the zoo, this cage that's sort of connected, there's this primitive gorilla, a guy in a suit as well. He grabs a hold of Milo, kills him. So it's basically Cornelius and Zira that are the only remaining intelligent apes. So there's a presidential commission board as they're looking into the return of Taylor's ship, but also how intelligent these apes are, and sort of, I guess, to tell if are they free enough to leave the zoo? Are they intelligent enough to be seen as someone of rights, I guess. And at first, the way Zira's answering questions, they think it's sort of kind of like a parrot, a mimicry. And then they ask Cornelius if he can speak, and I love this line. He just says, "Only when she lets me." And then that's when everyone laughs. And they ask him about where they came from, which they say, your future. They talk about the war that broke out. They do lie about knowing Taylor because, I guess because if they say he was killed by apes, it would get lumped in with the apes that killed him. But, also because they don't want to reveal how humans were treated by apes in their time. Which at one point she even says, like, about humans, she says, I've examined many of them. So they lie about Taylor, so it seems like they don't know humans. But the board seems to approve of them. And Stevie and Lewis decide to keep it a secret about Taylor. And the apes become celebrities. It gets said on the news they're going to stay at this lavish hotel. They're taking out clothes shopping where Cornelius gets a suit. She gets very nice clothes. They go to like museums. Cornelius goes to like a boxing match, which which he says is beastly, because chimpanzees are very passive. And it is like a comedy fish out of water story, because like how they're, even when they're in the hotel, there's like a cocktail party, which Zira has wine for the first time, which Lewis calls it like grape juice plus, which kind of like a Clockwork Orange nod, which came out the same year as Clockwork Orange. But so she gets drunk for the first time. There's like a scene when she's in a bath, like a bubble bath, and Cornelius like, how is that? She's like, soothing but wet. So it's like one of those fish out of water comedies. But of course, Dr. Otto Hasslein, he's the one that's obsessed with the fact that in 2,000 years, the Earth is going to end from an explosion. Because there's going to be this war between apes and whoever else. Because I don't think they ever really say who the war is against. But eventually it does come out that apes did treat humans the way they're treated now. As slaves, the hunted, whatever. So this Dr. Otto Hasslein, he's obsessed with trying to find a way to get rid of the apes. And then eventually, Zira is at this museum. She sees a prehistoric gorilla that's stuffed. She faints. They think it was from the sight of the gorilla, but that's when she says, no, it's because I'm pregnant. So then Dr. Otto takes her back to the hotel where he starts asking her about the future. He gets her drunk and then asks her about the future, where that's where she explains war and humans and the earth exploding, and he has like a fake cigarette holder that's a cassette recorder. So he records all that. And then there's like this big hearing over whether they should be allowed to keep their baby, because their offspring could be the genesis of turning around the whole future. One of my favorite parts about this film is I love the at one point they are asked, at one point did apes turn against humans? Like, when in the future did this whole thing start? And Cornelius gives us the history of the apes that we didn't really have in the first two films. And which also Dr. Otto, while Zero was drunk, she says gorillas went to war, orangutans supported it, chimpanzees were pacifists, but he thinks she's holding back, so that's why he keeps pushing the issue. That's really the main thing driving the plot, is that he keeps pushing the issue that they're not telling the whole truth, and eventually humans are going to be slaves to apes, and the world's going to end, and he's trying to fight it, even though it's in 2,000 years. So, I just want to find where where they start telling the truth about their history. Well, at either way, he says at one point there was this great plague that killed off cats and dogs. Man went without pets, so they took in primitive apes. And they started to get smart. They listened to speech. They were taught things. Around 200 years later, they were able to, became like part of the family with how well trained they were. Even being able to go out and get groceries and cook and clean. But then they started, and that was when they started learning the concept of slavery, and started to plot and revolt. And around 300 years into that timeline, there was an ape named Aldo who was smarter than the other apes. He understood, what was the word he used? He understood the concept of refusal. And it was then that the first ape spoke the first word against a human, and that word was no. Which we see as Caesar's story in the reboot, but it's nice to hear it as a story from Cornelius in this film. It's my favorite part of the movie. And then, eventually it was this big thing where it was ape against human. And then over the course of a few thousand years, humans just went primitive and became, the less dominant society. And as while Cornelius is going through this history, they're being held again, and with Dr. Otto, a couple other guys, one of which that's doing the questionnaires with Dr. Otto, I almost said Aldo. Otto is a character actor named Albert Salmi, who was in 3 Twilight Zone episodes, one of which is the season 4 episode of Late, I think, at Cliffordville, which is one of my favorite episodes. So he's one of the ones that's asking these questions. But they administer her some sodium pentothal, and that's when she reveals that she was the kind of doctor that would perform dissections and examinations on dead humans, dead apes, but also humans that were brought in from target practice or made available somehow, able to do lobotomies, the truth about Taylor. And then the outcome of this interrogation is brought to the board, and the board decides that they mustn't be allowed to keep their baby. The pregnancy must be terminated, and the 2 apes must be sterilized. And so, where Cornelius and Zira are being held, of course they're very upset. This orderly comes in and keeps talking about how this food is very strong for the little monkey in her belly. Which at several points, every time they say monkey, Cornelius talks about how it's offensive to them. So right when he says, oh, this is for that little monkey, which I hate when people call apes monkeys as well, Cornelius hits the tray out of his hand and they go to escape. But the camera pans down and shows he's bleeding out of his head. They accidentally killed him, which will now make them look hostile. And just throughout the film, Dr. Otto talks to the president, and the president just seems to think, yes, he does say things like, well, the voters love him. There are celebrities. There are guests. Who cares? I even like the line when he says, Dr. Otto's like, well, this could happen about 2,000 years. And the president just says, nah, I don't think we'll still be in office at that point. It does have some good dry humor in it. But by this time, Zira starts going into labor while they're out in the woods trying to escape from where they're being held. Cornelius hides her. He goes to find help. He finds Stevie. Stevie brings Cornelius to her. Lewis is able to enlist the help of this guy named Senor Armando, played by Ricardo Montalban. Yes, Star Trek fans will know him as Khan, which he's a guy that runs the circus, and he very much loves apes, more than humans. So he lets Cornelius and Zira lay low, give birth to the baby there, which they do, and it's a baby chimp, not a baby in makeup, which apes are my favorite animals, and I'm a huge sucker for baby chimps. They're the cutest thing on the planet. They decide to name him Milo, after their friend that died in the beginning of the film. All the while, there's this other chimp, which isn't a badly made costume. It's not a Planet of the Apes costume. It's a more modern day chimp, or present day chimp costume, named Heloise, that just had a baby. And she has a baby chimp as well, obviously. And Armando keeps talking about how it was the first chimp ever born in a circus. But now, of course, Dr. Otto and authorities are now looking for the fugitive apes for killing the orderly. Lewis is able to kind of throw him off by saying, judging by my time with them and the way I studied them, I'd say she has 8 to 10 days before she goes into labor, but she's already had the baby. So then Dr. Otto gets the idea to go from circus to circus, zoo to zoo, to see where they're laying low. Lewis tells Armando, and they tell Cornelius and Zira to go to this harbor, find this derelict ship lay low in that for a week. Then when Armando takes his traveling circus to Florida, go with him to the Everglades and live happily ever after. But on their way on foot to getting there, the baby's crying, and Zira, her hands are full. She leaves her suitcase by a oil derrick so she can have a free hand. And then they continue on foot. Dr. Otto and his men find the suitcase. They get helicopters. They find them on the ship. And it's amazing that this is rated G. And I mean, it makes sense that Conquest is PG because that's definitely the darkest and bloodiest out of all of them. But I mean, and this, spoiler alert, by the time Dr. Otto shows up, which also, excuse me, the president does say to Dr. Otto at one point, we don't shoot unarmed people or apes. You know, if they're unarmed, we don't shoot them. But Lewis gives Cornelius a pistol because Cornelius asks, you know, if we are encountered, we want, you know, because Cornelius says, we will be killed, won't we? We are going to be shot if we're found. Lewis says, yes. He says to give us the option to kill ourselves because we don't want that. So he gives them a pistol. So now they appear armed. So there's a chase between Zira and who has the baby and Dr. Otto, Cornelius. There's now cops and military everywhere, helicopters. Eventually, Dr. Otto shoots Zira. She falls. The baby falls. He shoots the fucking chimp baby, which is wrapped up in a blanket, 2 or 3 times. Cornelius shoots Dr. Otto. And then the cops shoot Cornelius. He falls off the deck house of the boat onto the bow. Zira dumps the baby into the water. And then she crawls over on top of Cornelius, lays on top of him and dies. Dr. Otto is dead. And that's the end of the movie. Very depressing. Which then we see, because earlier in the film, before they left the circus, Dr. Zira wanted to say goodbye to Heloise and her baby. Well, we see Armando back at the circus, who's like, you know, shaking the hand of the little baby chimp in Heloise's containment. And he's wearing this necklace that he gave baby Milo. So we see that Zira swapped babies with Heloise, thinking that her baby will have a better chance with her, and just took Heloise's baby, even though that baby got killed. And yeah, I still can't believe they shot the baby chimp. I know it's a movie, they didn't shoot it in real life, but in the context of the film. And the film ends with baby Milo saying, Mama. So we know there's going to be an intelligent ape that will grow up, which we will see in Conquest, which is probably my favorite of the sequels, is Conquest. I really enjoy that film. But I really enjoyed this one as well. I think it works as a great inverse of the first film, with the strangers in a strange land being treated like the hunted. Roddy McDowell and Kim Hunter were excellent in this. And they really do love these characters, because at their first board meeting, the way it was shot was they shot McDowell and Hunter first. And then, you know, they had the board kind of reacting, but with them actually acting. And then when they were done, they were going to show the board side. So they told McDowell and Hunter that they can take off their makeup because they're not going to be on camera. They just need their voices. And partway through removing the makeup, they said to each other, this feels weird and I don't like this. I feel the character slipping away. So they told the makeup people to leave the makeup on. And they kept the makeup on even though they weren't on camera delivering these lines, because they felt the character slipping away. They really like these characters and really got into it. And I'm glad Roddy McDowall came back to play Milo / Caesar in the next two films, because he's excellent, and it's probably my favorite performance by his as an ape in Conquest, especially the speech at the end of that film. But, you know, the first half of this really works as a science fiction comedy, and then the second half really works as like an escape, fugitive on the run kind of film with a love story wrapped all around it. And you can really see the change of Hollywood, because when Dr. Otto is walking up the steps of this abandoned ship, just like the camera work and everything, it really had this Wild West of Hollywood, like the 70s kind of style filmmaking. You know, something like, it had a sort of like a Richard Donner or like Steven Spielberg kind of feel to it. Like, it just, I don't know how to explain it, but it just had that really raw 70s look to it. That's very different from the previous films. And yeah, the ending's very depressing. It sucked to see these characters that, you know, we follow 3 films, see them, you know, especially see them be so beloved and appreciated in the beginning, to just being killed at the end. And I do like Roddy McDowall, after he gets shot, he has this and then falls. Shot the baby. But, you know, I do enjoy this film. I definitely see this as a great genesis of what will set up the what will set up the next two films. Like, you know, now we have our lone intelligent ape in a world of humans. And yeah, it's just definitely one of my favorite sequels. I really of this series, maybe even ever, because, you know, they took Beneath, which is one of the worst sequels I've seen, which seemed to have no way to continue it at the end of that, and made a very smart, great sequel out of it that worked as a reboot, really. But yeah, I definitely see why it's considered one of the best of the series. And just how it has that, it really works as an inverse with, and if Beneath didn't have the explosion of the planet and, you know, the references of this to that film, really would work just skipping it, so you can just watch Planet of the Apes in this. But of course, you know, there are things in Beneath that does make it a requisite that you have to watch it first. But I really enjoy this film. You know, just another example of why I love this series so much. I love Planet of the Apes. So there, that makes this the 6th Planet of the Apes review, and I've got 3 left. I've got 2 more of this series, and then the Tim Burton one, and that's all of them. But thank you for watching.